Poor Maiden lost job helping wounded stranger. Unaware, he was the giant Viking everyone feared. Trees bent under the force of the stormy gusts, their skeletal branches scratching the gray sky like desperate hands. In the center of the village, the market square lay abandoned, puddles reflecting the dim light of lanterns swaying in the wind. Life had always been harsh in Eltalo, but recently it had become harder still for Elira. Elira wandered alone along the muddy paths outside the village. She had lost her job at the apothecary a week ago, accused of a minor mistake that had blown out of proportion. Her heart felt heavy, as if each step forward pressed her down into the soil. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then quickly turning into a drumming sheet of water against her hood. She pulled her cloak tighter and trudged into the forest, a place most villagers avoided. The woods were dark and dense, tangled with undergrowth and ancient roots. Stories said that spirits walked here at night, and travelers often vanished without a trace. Yet something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps despair, drove her further in. As the shadows thickened, a strange sound broke the rhythm of the rain. A grunt of pain, low and human, echoed from a clearing ahead. Elira froze, her heart hammering. She wanted to run, wanted to turn back, but something inside urged her forward. She found herself stepping carefully over wet roots until she saw him. He lay against a fallen tree, his massive frame almost blending into the forest gloom. Blood darkened his clothing, staining the earth beneath him. His hair was long and black, plastered to his face, and his eyes, sharp, piercing, almost unnatural, blinked slowly as he studied her. The sight of him made Elira step back instinctively. The stranger's size alone was enough to intimidate. Even sitting, his shoulders seemed to fill the clearing, and his hands were large enough to crush her wrist with ease. She remembered the tales. The giant Viking, a warrior feared across the lands, said to destroy villages with a single swing of his axe. Could it be him? But he looked vulnerable now, wounded and quiet. Despite her fear, her compassion rose above it. She stepped closer, keeping her movements slow and careful. Are you hurt badly?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man's gaze lingered on her, dark and unreadable. Then he nodded slightly. "Yes," he said, his voice deep and gravelly, almost like the forest itself was speaking through him. Elira knelt beside him, pulling herbs from her satchel and wrapping cloths around his wounds as best she could. She worked quickly, her fingers shaking but steadying as necessity took over. Each touch, each careful fold of fabric brought her closer to him, and him closer to her. She felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination, as if the storm outside mirrored the storm rising inside her. Why are you helping me?" the stranger asked suddenly, his eyes narrowing. There was a weight in his voice, one that suggested danger as much as curiosity. I cannot leave someone to suffer," Elira replied softly, though her voice lacked the certainty she wished it had. "It doesn't matter who you are." A silence stretched between them. Rain fell in heavy sheets, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed like the drums of a funeral. The stranger's gaze softened just a fraction, as if surprised by her courage. "You are brave, foolish, but brave," he murmured. "Most would run." Elira's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something else she couldn't name. She had read about men of great power and violence, men who lived in legends of fear. But here he was, a human being with wounds and vulnerability. Something about him was both terrifying and compelling. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. It was hard to tell in the storm's chaos. Elira worked quietly, talking sometimes to distract herself from the pounding of her own heartbeat. She learned that he did not speak much of his past, answering her questions in fragments and riddles. There was pain in his eyes, and a loneliness that seemed older than time itself. Finally, he sat up, leaning against the tree with a groan. "I cannot leave this forest in my state," he admitted, his voice low and tight with discomfort. "You have saved me." "You are welcome," Elira said simply. Her words felt small but true. She did not know if he had enemies or if his name carried the weight of death, but at this moment he was simply a man in need. The stranger studied her, his sharp eyes softening into something like wonder. "I am called Rurik," he said finally, almost reluctantly. "But names mean little when the world fears you." Alira blinked. "Rurik," she repeated. "That is the name people whisper in the village. You are the giant Viking." He said nothing, his expression darkening. Shadows seemed to gather around him, as if the forest itself recognized his presence. Alira felt a shiver run down her spine. She had known she was risking herself by helping him, but the truth of it hit harder now. "You could have killed me," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I could have," Rurik admitted, "and many have feared me for it." Yet now he did not move against her. Instead, he allowed her to sit near him, the storm and forest forming a protective cocoon around them. In that space, fear and fascination mingled. Alira could see the traces of pain, of battles fought and survived, etched into his face. And for the first time, she wondered if legends could hide humanity within their shadows. Hours passed, and the storm began to ease, though the night remained thick. Alira wrapped her own cloak tighter around herself, trying to keep warm. She caught him staring at her once, his gaze unreadable yet intense. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke and iron, traces of the battles that had shaped him. "Why did you come here?" she asked suddenly, unable to keep the question inside. "Into this forest alone." Rurik's expression tightened and he looked away. "Sometimes the world demands solitude," he said. "Other times it leaves no choice." His voice carried a sadness so deep that it made Alira's chest ache. "You don't have to face it alone," she said softly, and for a moment her words seemed to reach him. There was a pause. Then, as if deciding something, he looked back at her, the flicker of something almost human in his eyes. "Few dare to touch the darkness inside me and live," he murmured. "You are different." Alira swallowed. She did not know whether to feel pride or fear. There was an undeniable pull between them, an invisible thread that neither could ignore. The storm had stopped, leaving the forest in a heavy, wet silence. Then the sound of distant movement snapped them both to attention, branches cracking under heavy feet. Rurik's eyes narrowed and his body tensed. "If anyone knew you were here, you would not live to see dawn," he whispered, his voice low, almost a growl. Alira felt her blood run cold, but she also felt a strange defiance rise within her. "I will not leave you," she said, standing firm despite the fear curling in her stomach. Rurik studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the risk of trusting her. Finally, he leaned back against the tree, sighing through his teeth. "Perhaps you are braver than I expected," he said. The night stretched on, thick and dark, with the forest pressing in around them. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the scars on Rurik's arms, the raw edges of his wounds, and the cautious determination on Alira's face. Here in the edge of the world, two souls met, a feared warrior and a lost maiden, both carrying pain and secrets, both drawn to the fragile thread of humanity between them. As dawn neared, the first faint light touched the forest floor. Alira had tended to him all night, and though exhaustion pulled at her limbs, she felt a strange satisfaction in her heart. The man before her was dangerous, powerful, and terrifying, but also undeniably human. Rurik looked at her, his expression unreadable. "The world outside this forest will never understand you or me," he said quietly. "But for tonight you have kept me alive." Alira nodded, her voice soft. "And I will continue to help you, no matter what." A silent agreement hung between them, as fragile as the morning mist. The wind shifted, carrying whispers of legends and curses, of warriors and heroes, of fear and hope. And somewhere deep in the forest, the shadows seemed to pause, as if sensing that a new story had begun, one of danger, of compassion, and perhaps of something more. Outside the trees, the faintest sound of approaching footsteps reminded them that the world beyond the forest still existed. The villagers did not know what had happened here, nor would they. But Alira and Rurik, two strangers bound by fate, were now entwined in a story far larger than either could imagine. And in that moment, the giant Viking and the poor maiden lost in the woods realized something neither had expected. In each other, they had found a spark of life worth protecting. The first light of morning filtered through the dense canopy of the forest, casting streaks of gold across the damp ground. Mist clung to the trees like a veil, softening the edges of the dark woods. Alira stirred, her body aching from the long night spent tending to Rurik's wounds. She glanced at him, lying against a fallen log, his chest rising and falling steadily. Despite the size and strength that legend attributed to him, he looked fragile here, almost human. Rurik's eyes flickered open, dark irises catching the early light. "You stayed," he said, his voice quieter than it had been the night before. Alira smiled faintly, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "I said I would," she replied. "I couldn't just leave you out here, hurt and alone." For a moment, Rurik said nothing. He stared at the sky through the branches as if searching for answers in the clouds. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "The world fears me, and yet here you are, you do not seem afraid." Alira shrugged. "Maybe I am afraid, but fear doesn't stop me from helping." Her words were simple, but Rurik could feel the weight behind them. They carried honesty, courage, and a quiet strength he had not expected to encounter. The forest around them was alive with the morning sounds of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the drip of water from soaked branches. But beneath the calm, a tension lingered, like the hush before a storm. Rurik rose slowly to his feet, testing the strength in his legs, and found that he could move more than he had thought. Yet the pain in his side reminded him that he was far from whole. "I must keep moving," he said, his tone firm. "I cannot stay in one place too long, they would find me." Alira looked at him, concern etched across her face. "Who would find you?" she asked. Rurik's eyes darkened. "Those who hunt me, those who fear my strength and the curse I carry. I am not welcome anywhere, not even among men who call themselves kings and warriors. My past, it is full of blood and sorrow." Alira's heart tightened. She had not known what to expect when she had helped him, but hearing the weight of his words made her realize the depth of his isolation. "You are not alone now," she said softly. "At least, not while I am here." Rurik glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, a shadow of a smile touched his lips. "You are brave or foolish," he murmured. "Perhaps both," Alira replied, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. They set off cautiously through the forest, Rurik leaning on a sturdy branch he had picked up as support. Each step was careful, measured, as though the forest itself might betray them at any moment. Yet as they walked, an unspoken understanding formed between them. Alira began to learn the rhythm of his movements, the way he guarded himself, and even the small hints of his personality that shone through the stoic exterior. "Why do they call you the giant Viking?" she asked after a while, her curiosity breaking the silence. Rurik's jaw tightened. "Because I am large and because I have destroyed what needed destroying. The world remembers those who bring fear more than those who bring peace." Alira frowned. "Do you regret it?" He did not answer immediately. The question seemed to weigh on him. Finally he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I regret losing myself. I have been shaped by anger, by betrayal, by the curse that clings to me. I regret the solitude, and yet it has kept others alive." Alira nodded, understanding more than he might have thought. "You are not the same as your past," she said gently. "Even if you have been feared, that does not define you entirely." Rurik's eyes met hers, searching, as if trying to decide whether to trust her words or dismiss them as folly. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with years of pain. "Perhaps you are right, but it is difficult to believe that when every step I take carries shadows." The path led them to a small, hidden stream. The water ran cold and clear, and the gentle sound of it moving over rocks was soothing after the storm of the previous night. Elira knelt to fill a small cup from her satchel, offering it to Rurik. He took it silently, drinking deeply, then handed it back without a word. "You are strong," Elira said, watching him. "Even though you are hurt, you keep moving." Rurik's eyes softened, though the hardness in them did not fully fade. "Strength alone is not enough," he said. "I have survived by cunning, by fear, by knowing when to fight and when to hide. But even that is not enough to keep the past from reaching me." Elira studied him, sensing the storm beneath the surface. "Then perhaps you need someone who will stand by you not out of fear but because they choose to." He glanced at her, and for the first time there was a hint of vulnerability in his gaze. "And you? Why do you choose this path? Why risk yourself for someone like me?" Elira hesitated. She did not know the answer fully. Perhaps it was her nature, her compassion, or maybe something deeper, a curiosity that had grown into something she could not explain. "Because I cannot ignore what is right," she said finally. "Because I see something in you beyond the fear and the stories, and perhaps because I hope to help you find peace." Rurik looked away, his jaw tense. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the shadows stretching longer as if listening to their conversation. He had spent years hiding, running from enemies, from himself, from the darkness that clung to him. Yet here was someone who did not flinch, who saw him as a man rather than a legend of terror. Hours passed as they continued through the forest, moving cautiously but steadily. The wind carried whispers of danger, rustling leaves that sounded almost like voices. Rurik's senses remained alert, every step measured, every sound noted. But Elira's presence beside him softened the edge of constant vigilance, even if only slightly. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a small clearing. Wildflowers had begun to bloom despite the harshness of the forest, their colors muted by the morning mist. Rurik stopped, scanning the horizon, then finally relaxed his posture just a fraction. "You have made it this far, yet danger still follows," he said quietly. "There are those who would see me dead, and now you are tied to me." Elira met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Then I will face it with you," she said. Her words carried certainty, though her heart thumped with the knowledge of what she had promised. Rurik's eyes softened, and for a brief moment the shadows around him seemed to retreat. "Few have stayed by my side willingly," he said. "You are, unlike anyone I have known." Elira felt a warmth rise in her chest, a fragile spark of hope amidst the lingering fear. She had ventured into the forest, lost and without purpose, and found herself in the company of a man who had lived through centuries of battles, fear, and solitude. And though she did not fully understand him, she felt an unspoken connection forming, a bond built not on legends or fear, but on trust and quiet courage. Suddenly, a rustle in the undergrowth froze them both. Rurik's body tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the hilt of a hidden weapon. Elira's heart raced, but she stood firm beside him. From the shadows emerged a lone figure, cloaked and hooded, moving with a cautious yet deliberate gait. Rurik's eyes narrowed instantly. "They have found me," he muttered, a growl vibrating in his chest. Elira felt a chill run through her. She had known helping him carried risk, but this was the first real proof that danger was close. She instinctively stepped closer to him, feeling the strength and presence of the man she had come to trust. The figure stopped a short distance away, speaking in a low voice that carried over the clearing. "Rurik, the council demands your presence. You cannot hide forever." Rurik's expression darkened. "I have no intention of going back to them," he said, voice firm. "I have survived this long by keeping my distance. I will not return to a life of chains and fear." Elira glanced at him, sensing the weight of his words. This was more than a threat. It was a choice between freedom and the world that feared him. And she realized that whatever path they chose next would define them both. The cloaked figure lingered for a moment, then retreated into the trees, leaving only the echo of their warning. Rurik exhaled, tension leaving him in a slow, controlled manner. He turned to Alira, his expression unreadable but serious. "You should not have come this far," he said. "Now your life is bound to mine, whether you like it or not." Alira looked at him, determination firm in her eyes. "I choose to stay," she said. "I am not afraid of your past or the dangers that follow you. We face them together." For the first time, Rurik allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Perhaps you truly are braver than I thought," he murmured. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the morning mist swirled around them. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with shadows, enemies, and curses, yet a fragile bond had been formed, one that might survive the darkness. And as they moved forward, side by side, the legend of the giant Viking and the lost maiden began to intertwine with something neither had expected: hope, trust, and the first faint spark of connection. But in the distance, the faint sound of marching boots reminded them that the outside world would not remain patient. Danger was approaching, and the choices they made next would test not only their courage, but the bond that had begun to grow between them. The forest began to thin, revealing jagged cliffs and a ruined fortress perched on the edge of a mountainside. Its walls, cracked and worn, told stories of battles long past, of kings who had fallen and warriors who had died defending it. The wind whipped across the stones, carrying the scent of rain, moss, and old blood. Rurik paused at the edge of the path, scanning the ruins carefully. Every instinct screamed caution. "We can hide there," he said finally, pointing to a broken archway that led inside the fortress. "It is not much, but it will give us shelter for the day." Alira nodded, gripping her cloak tightly. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the sense of adventure, danger, and proximity to Rurik. The closer they got, the more she realized how much strength he carried, not just in body but in the weight of his past. They entered the fortress cautiously. Inside, shadows stretched across the stones, creating shapes that seemed almost alive. Broken banners fluttered in the breeze, and the remnants of furniture lay scattered, as if abandoned in haste. The place was silent, but it held a kind of energy, a mix of danger, sorrow, and ancient power. Rurik led the way to a small chamber, its walls cracked but still solid. He lowered himself against a broken column, grimacing as pain from his wound reminded him of the last days of running. Alira set her satchel down and knelt beside him, retrieving the cloths and herbs she had saved. "You need more care," she said softly. "Your wound is not healed yet," Rurik shook his head. "I can endure it, you have already risked too much for me." Alira's eyes narrowed. "No, you are not letting me help you fully. I will not stand by and watch you suffer." Her voice was firm, yet gentle, carrying an authority he rarely encountered. For a moment, Rurik studied her, his sharp eyes softening. "You are persistent," he said, almost a whisper. "Few insist on standing with me, even when danger surrounds us. Why do you care so much?" Alira hesitated. Her answer would have to be honest, even if it sounded foolish. "Because I see a man, not a legend. Because I see someone who is hurting and alone, and I cannot ignore it." He looked at her, and for the first time he allowed a vulnerability to surface. "You are unlike anyone I have known," he admitted. "Most people flee from my shadow. You walk straight into it." A silence settled between them, heavier than the air outside. The wind howled across the fortress walls, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed through the mountains. Yet in that silence there was something unspoken, an understanding, a fragile connection forming between two souls shaped by loss, pain, and the constant presence of fear. Hours passed. Alira tended to Rurik as best as she could, cleaning the wound and applying herbs that would ease the pain. She spoke quietly, telling him stories of the village, of simple moments, of things that reminded her of home. Slowly, the fortress felt less like a tomb and more like a place where trust could grow, even in the shadow of danger. "You talk as if you know me," Rurik said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "Yet you have only seen fragments." The rest is not something a person should know, not without fear. Elira shook her head. I am not afraid, she said. I am cautious, yes, but I do not fear what you are, Rurik. I fear losing you to your past, to those who hunt you, but I do not fear you. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he reached out a massive hand, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. And yet, you risk everything by being here, he said. You cannot understand what it is like to carry what I carry. Elira met his gaze, steady and unwavering. Then teach me, she said. Let me understand. Let me help you carry it, even if only a little. He studied her, and for the first time he allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. Perhaps that is why I have not lost myself entirely. Because of you. The moment hung between them, fragile and electric, as the storm outside continued to rage. Rurik's hand lingered near hers, and she felt the warmth of his skin against the cold stone. Neither moved to break the silence, both caught in the tension of something neither fully understood, a bond forming, tested by danger, fear, and an unspoken longing. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the fortress. Stones shifted, and dust fell from the ceiling. Rurik sprang to his feet, moving with a speed and precision that belied his massive size. They are here, he growled, eyes narrowing. We must prepare. Elira's heart raced. She had expected danger, but this was closer than she had imagined. She stood beside him, her own fear tempered by the courage she felt in his presence. What do we do? She asked. Rurik glanced at her, then around the fortress. We fight, but carefully. You stay close and do as I say. Trust me. Elira nodded, though her hands trembled. She had never fought before, yet she felt a strange sense of readiness. Perhaps it was the bond forming between them, or the belief that they were stronger together. Footsteps approached, echoing through the ruins. Shadows moved along the walls, and the wind carried faint voices, men searching for the giant Viking. Rurik moved to the entrance, peering through the broken stones. His eyes narrowed. They do not know what waits for them, he muttered. Elira felt a shiver of anticipation and fear. She had helped him, tended to him, and now she was part of the danger that had haunted him for so long. And yet, despite the fear, she felt alive in a way she had never known. The first attackers appeared, creeping along the walls. Rurik stepped forward, his massive frame a shield against the approaching threat. His movements were precise, controlled, yet powerful. He struck with authority, not recklessness, every motion measured to subdue rather than destroy. Elira watched, her breath held as he defended their position. She could see the strength of the man behind the legend, the discipline, the experience, the careful balance between fury and control. And she realized that this was more than fearsome power. This was a man who carried the weight of his past with him, who had survived centuries of conflict, and who now, somehow, allowed her to stand beside him. The attackers faltered, unsure how to face someone so immense, yet so deliberate. Rurik's presence alone seemed to bend the forest and fortress to his command, but he did not strike recklessly. Each move was precise, each decision careful, as if the survival of both himself and Elira depended on it. During a brief lull, Rurik turned to Elira. Stay close. Watch and learn. Do not underestimate them or me, he said. Elira nodded, her resolve firm. I will follow your lead, she said, together. The battle continued intense, silent bursts, shadows moving through the fortress, the clatter of stone, and the distant roar of the storm outside. Through it all, the bond between Rurik and Elira grew stronger, built on trust, courage, and the quiet understanding that they could rely on each other. Finally, after what felt like hours, the attackers retreated, leaving the fortress in a tense, uneasy silence. Rurik leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, yet his eyes found Elira immediately. You have courage, he said, his voice rough but warm. Most would have fled long ago. Elira smiled faintly, brushing dirt from her cloak. I stay because I believe in you, she said softly. And because I choose to. For the first time, Rurik allowed himself a deeper smile, the weight of centuries easing slightly. "Perhaps there is hope yet," he murmured. They sat together in the ruins, the storm outside beginning to fade, leaving the world damp but calm. The fortress, once a place of despair, now felt like a refuge, a place where trust and courage could grow. And as they rested, a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever dangers remained, they would face them together. But even in this quiet, Rurik knew that their trials were not over. Shadows still lingered, enemies still searched, and the curse that haunted him remained. Yet for the first time he felt a spark of something he had long thought impossible: connection, hope, and perhaps redemption. Elira, sitting close to him, felt the same. She had ventured into a forest full of fear and legends, and had found a man who was both terrifying and human, a man who carried both pain and strength. And now, as they faced the quiet after the storm, she understood that their bond had been tested, strengthened, and had begun to take root. Outside, the first rays of sunlight pierced the mist, illuminating the ruins in gold and gray. The world beyond the fortress waited, full of danger, mystery, and the unknown. But inside, two hearts, one broken, one uncertain, beat together in quiet courage. And somewhere deep within the fortress, hidden in the shadows, the faintest whisper of a curse stirred, reminding them that their trials were far from over. The fortress lay quiet in the early morning light, but the calm was fragile. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and heavy with mist. Broken stones glistened with dew, and shadows clung stubbornly to the cracks and corners of the ruined walls. Rurik and Elira stood side by side, peering through the archway at the forest beyond. Danger still lingered in the distance, hunters of the giant Viking, servants of curses and old grudges. But for now, the fortress seemed theirs alone. Rurik flexed his shoulders, testing the strength in his arms and legs. His wound had healed more than he expected, thanks to Elira's careful tending. Yet the pain reminded him of how close they had come to disaster. He looked at her standing steadfast, her cloak damp and hair tangled from the storm, and felt a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. "You have been brave," he said quietly, his voice rough but sincere. "No one else would have stayed by my side." Elira met his gaze, her eyes steady. "I am not brave," she said softly. "I just choose to help, choose to trust. That is all." Rurik's lips curved in a faint smile, the kind that did not reach his eyes completely. "Perhaps that is enough," he admitted. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a faint sound of movement, a crack of branches, the echo of boots on stone. Rurik tensed, muscles coiling like a spring. "They are coming," he whispered, voice tight. "We cannot stay hidden any longer. If we are to survive, we must face them." Elira's heart pounded, but she did not step back. Instead, she moved closer to him. "Then we face them together," she said, and her voice carried more strength than she realized. Rurik nodded, and together they moved to the fortress's outer wall. The first enemies came into view, a small band of soldiers, cautious but determined, moving swiftly through the forest. Their faces were hidden, but Rurik knew their intent. They had come to capture him or kill him. He glanced at Elira. "Stay behind me," he instructed. "Trust me," she nodded, hands trembling slightly but ready to follow. Despite her fear, she knew that she would not leave him alone. The soldiers approached, and Rurik stepped forward, his massive frame towering over the path. His presence alone seemed to command respect, and fear flickered across the faces of those who had come seeking him. Yet Rurik did not attack immediately. He moved with precision, guiding them, manipulating the battlefield without unnecessary violence. Every strike, every movement was controlled, careful, a demonstration of skill and restraint. Elira watched in awe. The man who had been a legend of terror was now a figure of disciplined power, tempered by wisdom and necessity. And through it all, he fought not recklessly, but with the knowledge that she depended on him, and that she could endure more than most because of the bond they shared. When a soldier lunged too close, Rurik caught him by the arm, twisting him away from Alira with controlled force. "Stay back," he barked, his voice echoing through the ruins. "Do not test me." Alira's heart raced, but she held her ground. She had seen his strength, yes, but she had also seen the restraint, the care. And she knew that he would not allow her to be harmed. After what seemed like hours, but was only moments, the soldiers hesitated. Rurik's presence, his mastery of the space, and the quiet courage of the maiden beside him created a force that neither could understand fully. Slowly, the attackers began to retreat, recognizing that they were not facing a simple man, nor a mindless giant, but something far more dangerous, a warrior in full control of his power, and a companion who refused to fear him. The last of the soldiers disappeared into the trees, leaving only silence and the faint echo of their boots fading into the forest. Rurik exhaled, his muscles relaxing just slightly, though the tension never fully left him. He turned to Alira, eyes dark and unreadable, and for a moment he seemed almost hesitant. "You stayed," he said softly, voice rough with emotion, "even when danger pressed close." "I stayed," Alira replied simply, "because I choose to, because I trust you." Rurik's gaze softened. Slowly he reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "I do not know if I have ever been understood like this," he admitted, "or if I ever will again." Alira met his eyes, and in that moment a quiet understanding passed between them. The walls around them could not contain the bond that had grown, the shared trust, courage, and the beginnings of something deeper, something neither had expected. Rurik's hand lingered near hers. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if he feared breaking the fragile connection they had built. "If I fall, you must survive," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "You will not fall," Alira said firmly. "We face this together. Whatever comes, we face it side by side." The wind carried the distant sound of movement again, but this time it was not soldiers. The forest seemed to hum, alive with energy, shadows twisting unnaturally along the walls of the fortress. Rurik's expression darkened. "The curse," he muttered, jaw tightening. "It follows me. Even when I fight men, it is never gone." Alira reached out, placing her hand over his. "Then we face it together," she said. "We do not have to fight alone." Rurik looked at her, the weight of centuries in his gaze, and something shifted. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was the realization that he could trust someone fully, not just with his life but with his heart. "You may have tamed a part of me I thought lost," he said quietly. The shadows began to gather at the edge of the ruins, moving like living things. The curse was near, drawn to Rurik's presence, to the bond he had formed with Alira. The air thickened, heavy with magic and malice, and the ground seemed to pulse beneath their feet. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice steady now, but eyes sharp. Alira nodded, gripping her cloak tightly. "I am ready, with you." Together they stepped forward. Rurik's massive frame led the way, and Alira moved close, trusting in his strength and in the bond they had forged. The shadows surged, swirling around them, testing, probing, seeking weakness. Rurik held his ground, moving with precision, striking where needed but never recklessly. Alira followed, her presence a calming force, her courage bolstering his. The battle with the curse was not of fists or weapons alone. It was a battle of wills, of trust, of the strength to face the darkness within and without. Rurik felt the centuries of anger, fear, and isolation pressing on him, but Alira's presence grounded him, reminded him that he was more than the stories, more than the legend of fear. Step by step, they moved through the shadows. Each strike, each movement, each word of encouragement between them weakened the curse's hold. Slowly, the darkness began to recede, the shadows dissipating like mist under the morning sun. Finally, they stood together in the clearing outside the fortress. The air was clear, the first rays of dawn breaking through the mist. The battle was over, though the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain. Rurik turned to Alira, eyes dark but softer than they had ever been. "You have changed me," he admitted. Perhaps more than I thought possible. Alira smiled, reaching for his hand. And you have shown me courage, strength, and that even the darkest legends have light within them. For the first time, they allowed themselves a moment of peace. The storm had passed, the shadows had faded, and in the quiet of the dawn, two souls, one feared by the world, one lost and searching, found each other. Rurik lowered himself to one knee, not in submission, but in quiet acknowledgement of the bond they shared. "The world may fear me," he said softly, "but you have seen me. You have believed in me, and for that I am grateful beyond words." Alira touched his face gently. "I have not seen fear, Rurik, I have seen you." They stood together as the sun climbed higher, painting the mountains in gold and silver. The fortress, once a place of despair, now felt like a beginning, a place where trust, courage, and love could grow. The world beyond the forest was still uncertain, still full of challenges, but they faced it as one. The giant Viking and the poor maiden had survived the storm, the danger, and the shadows. And now, in the light of dawn, they began a new journey, one of redemption, hope, and the quiet power of hearts joined in courage and trust. As they walked down from the fortress, side by side, the forest seemed to sigh, the wind carrying a whisper of approval. The past remained behind them, but its lessons remained alive. And somewhere deep in their souls, both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger than the legends, stronger than the curses, and stronger than fear itself.